Welcome back to Brokati Tsitski. Oh my gosh. Tripping over my computer cord. Okay, so a couple days ago I came across a film trailer for a movie called Leigh about Isabella Blow. And I had a bunch of feelings come up for me when I saw that trailer, because Isabella Blow is a very important figure to me in my past life as a fashion student. So I had gone to a community college. I went to Fullerton College when I was 18, and I studied fashion there. I met really, really wonderful, beautiful, the human beings that I met there who were my teachers when I studied fashion at Fullerton College, I think about sometimes because they were so wonderful and beautiful. I had this wonderful teacher named Mrs. Fuqua. I had this teacher that I absolutely adored, who was the best pattern making teacher in the world, and her grandmother had been a pattern making teacher, believe it or not. And her name was Linda, and I loved Linda. She also taught draping, and I didn't actually understand pattern making until I took a draping class, and then I was like, why don't you just teach draping from the beginning? It literally makes everything so simple, and you instantly understand why everything is the way that it is. So once I had taken draping, I was like, what? You need to teach this first. So there was Linda, there was Janet, and Janet was this like really amazing lady. There were other teachers there as well. There was this woman named Sanda who taught swimwear, and she was also like very cool. There were all these amazing teachers. I had gone to school with all these like amazing, mostly women, but there were some men in the class as well. Not all of them were gay either, which was interesting. I mean, not that we like talked about it so much, but we kind of all assumed, this was like back in the mid-90s, and so we assumed that if you were a boy in a fashion class, you were gay. But that's not always the case, of course. So there was a lot going on, and I actually spent a lot of time at my junior college because I felt when I graduated from high school, I felt very young for my age. I felt very gullible, very naive. I felt very inexperienced in all kinds of life matters. And I think I just was really slow. I really was just slow, and I wanted to feel comfortable. And so I spent several years at my junior college. I took all kinds of classes. One of my favorite classes that I took there was a theater costume design class, where we made our own costume for the Renaissance Fair, and then our final was go to the Renaissance Fair, you know, in your costume that you had spent all semester making. My mom later ended up throwing away that costume when I was in Poland. So, God, this is not a video about my family. But in a way it is a video about my family, because fashion was my first great love as a teen girl. Fashion was my first great love. And the first designer that ever had a profound influence on me, oh thank God I'm sitting next to the computer. I can't believe I'm forgetting his name. Okay, hold on. I just had an English lesson, so I'm sitting in front of the computer. Robert Blackman! I didn't even look it up. I'm like, Robert Blackman. So that was the first person that I ever fell in love with as a designer. Hold on, I'm just gonna confirm that that's him. I know it's him because I saw his name a million times when I was a kid, but I'm just gonna confirm it anyway. Yes. So that was like my biggest influence as a kid, because as a kid I watched so much Star Trek. I mean, I watched lots of other things too. Like I remember being 5 and like watching The Twilight Zone. But then and of course everybody had seen classic Trek, right? But then when I was around 10, Next Generation came out, and so I was like constantly glued to the TV when that came out. So my greatest fashion influence is Robert Blackman, who designed for Star Trek Next Generation. And I never even consciously realized that until I was in my, and I still have this project buried in storage somewhere, until I was in my very final semester of real fashion school. Yeah, but I'll get to that. Okay, so so I spent a lot of time at community college trying to do fashion, but I also studied many other things as well. I took an economics class just for fun. I think I had to take it, but it was also just for fun. I took all kinds of crazy classes just for fun because I could. Because in high school I felt so smashed and so stymied, and I remember wanting to take French in high school, and the semester that I came to high school was the final semester of French, so I never got to take French. And then when I went to my junior college, I wanted to take French, but they also didn't have French. So throughout high school and for my first year of junior college, I took German. So I actually have had 5 years of German. And so it was kind of this exciting time in my life being in junior college. And that happened pretty much between the age of 18 to 21. And then I went to Poland for a year where I taught English. That was when I first started teaching English, was when I was 21 in Poland. And then when I got back, I went hard, and I had 1 more year at junior college, and I was taking like 13 classes a semester, just cramming everything. And I took all these crazy fashion production classes, fashion this, fashion that. And at the end of that year, I was like, what the fuck am I gonna do? I need a degree. I need a degree of some kind, right? So what I got at the end of community college was called a certificate in fashion design. Fine, so I got that. So then I was like, I need a degree. So I looked around and I wanted to get a BFA in fashion design, but there were no public universities or colleges at the time that offered a 4-year program in fashion design. So if I wanted to do that, I had to go to a private school. So I tried applying for Parsons. I was rejected. Parsons didn't want my ass, which is fine. Maybe I wouldn't have been a good Parsons candidate. I don't know. And they did accept me for like an overseas study abroad program in Paris, actually. And then I was like, but financial aid. And they're like, what financial aid? And I'm like, thanks for accepting me, bye. So I never got to do a semester in Paris, but that's okay. And somehow, oh yes, I know how this happened. So I used to go to the library a lot. This was the Brea Olinda Civic Center library, and it was like relatively new at the time. I used to go there a lot just to get all kinds of books. And then after I graduated high school during that summer, I was like, no, sorry, not high school. After I finished my certificate, I was like, I need to find a school to go to. And at this point I was like 22. Yeah, I was about 22. So I literally took some book that they had with a list of colleges, and I opened it, and what was the first name on the list of schools? The Academy of Art University. Actually, at the time it was called the Academy of Art College. It was still the Academy of Art College because this was the summer of '95. You know, back when the world was normal, which I know it'll never be normal again, but back when the world was normal, I went to the library and looked at a book, at a list of schools, and that was the school that I decided to go to. And on top of that, the school was in San Francisco, so it's only like an hour away by plane. You can drive there in about 7 hours. I wouldn't be terribly far away from my mom and dad. I wouldn't be terribly far away from like, you know, my one friend that I had in junior college and her family. Her family had been really sweet to me and had sort of adopted me. That was my good friend Elisa. And she was an amazing couturier. She was amazing. I was often envious of Elisa's ability to sew because she was a fucking genius. So yes, that was kind of how, and of course I met Elisa. Elisa and I met in the costume class where we had to make our costume, and then our final was to go to the Renaissance Fair. So we met in that class, and we stayed friends for many years after that. It's just really weird to kind of go down this, in order to explain why it's triggering to see a movie about Isabella Blow, I have to like explain my fashion past. So in any case, the long and the short of it was that I ended up going to the academy. I spent 4.5 years there. In addition to the however many like years I had spent at junior college, they transferred in I think a year or two of my classes, but because of their requirements, I still ended up spending 4.5 years there. So I think in total, I went to school for about 9 years to learn fashion, and my dream was to become a couturier because I was young and naive, and I thought that that was just something that you could do. In a weird way, when I later started to design, oh, nice, okay. So I later started to work with my best friend, whom I met at the academy, to design these stickers. Well, most of these are mine. I would design them, and then he sort of like works in Photoshop and Illustrator to execute them for me. In school at the academy, I had a bunch of like Illustrator classes and Photoshop classes, but I always absolutely detested working in Photoshop and Illustrator. And my best friend Doug would always come into the lab and do my homework for me. And he had his own homework, right? So when I finally went to the academy, and none of the fashion students liked me, and I was like the black sheep of the fucking fashion department, and they didn't really like me. A lot of my teachers didn't like me either. So the teachers at my other school, at the junior college, had liked me, and the ones at the real fashion school, at the fancy fashion school, those people didn't like me. And the students didn't really like me either. So the only people that I hung out with were the animators. Like for some reason, anytime I met somebody and they were like nice to me and they were cool and we could like talk about shit and we could hang out and like eat food and stuff, it was always a fucking animator. So I ended up hanging out with all the animation students. Not all of them, just the cool ones, which most of them were cool because they're fucking animators. Like animators, right? Their left shoe, more often than not, was always untied. So that moment in Lilo and Stitch, which is one of my favorite, Lilo and Stitch is my favorite contemporary Disney film. Oh God. So that moment where they talk about untying everybody's left shoe, I was like, oh, this person had animation friends, because for some reason, like, I don't know if it was specifically the left shoe, but there was always one shoe untied with animators. I don't know why. Motherfuckers can't tie their shoes. See, this is why Velcro was invented, to keep nerdy animators from ending up in Lilo and Stitch as a reference. Oh yes, and animators always kept porn in a stack under the bed for reference, because it was the early 2000s and that's what everybody did. And so my friend Nina was like, she was the one fashion student that kind of liked me and that we could like, you know, talk, right? We could like talk like people. And Nina's like, if it's for reference, why is it always under the bed? So that was a good point that she made at that time. If it's for reference, bro, why is it always under the bed? So yeah, but it's a fair point that when you go to art school, you have to draw a lot from live models. Most of those models are going to be nude. They did, of course, have lots of clothed figure drawing workshops as well. I've got, oh God, I think I've like dumped most of them in the garbage by now. I've got many newsprint enormous pads, or I had many of them. I think I've really thrown most of them away, to be perfectly fucking honest, because it was like 30 by the end of like the 4.5 years, right? Of like all of this shit from like nude and clothed figure drawing workshops. I think I saved some that were like maybe, I don't know how much I saved, probably not that much. So lots of illustration classes, lots of fashion classes. For some reason, I was always in danger of failing my fashion classes at the academy, and it wasn't just because the teachers didn't like me, it was because, I don't fucking know why. I'd be like, how am I failing knitwear? I'm failing knitwear. I literally have A's in everything else, but I'm failing knitwear. And so stuff like that would happen. When I hung out with animators, all of their friends who were also animators always thought I was an animator, which I always thought was like a huge compliment. That was always like awesome. Like, Doug's friends think I'm an animator. No, I'm in fashion. And they'd be like, oh, I'm sorry. I'm like, yeah, I made a mistake. But you don't know that at the time, because at the time that I went into fashion school, whether it was, well, junior college, that was a different thing, right? That was like kind of not on that same level. But by the time that you go to like fucking expensive ass academy fashion school, that shit, it's different. So one of my classmates was Marielle Hadid. with the famous sisters, that was one of my classmates. I remember she always looked fabulous. She always looked like the cover of a 60s men's magazine. And I was always like afraid to talk to her. She just always looked perfect. Like she never broke a bead of sweat in her life. And I always felt like a greasy, fat, disgusting mess. And I was thinner back then, but I always just felt like a fat, disgusting mess. Fashion school is not a place you want to go to if you feel like a fat, disgusting mess. But that was what it was. And so for me anyway, that's what it was. I remember that the woman that I had taken flat pattern, not flat pattern, oh god, what the fuck was that called? The flats class. So, okay, when you design a line of clothing, you have illustrations, but pretty much, I don't know like how many people actually have time for illustrations if you're working. Maybe you like have a set of croquis and you just like block out some things and you change some things. I think that's how it's done. I don't know. I never really worked in fashion, but as far as like the classes, what they taught us to do, you had to have, you know, your croquis, your illustrations with your, you know, 10 head figures. They always look like weird monsters. I always made mine thick, but no matter how thick I made them, they always just looked like a size 10 because I want to do plus size fashion. So I had one teacher who was a size 14. She was this monstrous woman. I think she was from Romania, I can't quite remember, and she was utterly and absolutely terrifying. I can't really describe, I'm not going to say her name, but I can't really describe the vibe that this woman has. It was just absolutely unbelievable. I know that one time she actually took two people that were like nice to me that I had class with, and she took them outside and she told them that I was gonna drag them down and that they shouldn't be my friend because I was like an albatross that was gonna drag them down. And the only reason that I knew that is because both of them afterwards came and told me that that's what she said. Actually, let's say her name. That cunt's name was Ileana, and she was an ugly cunt. Ileana. So Ileana was an ugly, miserable cunt, and that's what she did because I actually had two people that cared about me in the entire department that were like nice to me and that talked to me, and she's like, oh no, like you bitches, this bitch is gonna drag you down. So yeah, Ileana is a cunt, and that's what she said. And everybody fucking hated her. So many people hated her. And I've never really talked publicly about my experiences at fashion school because they were so miserable once I was at the academy, and it just kind of seemed like a part of my life that was finished, and like there's no reason to talk about that. So I did actually end up using my skills many years later when I started doing burlesque, because then all of a sudden I could actually be a costume designer and I could design my own stuff. I could source my own stuff. I could put it all together. I knew how much fabric was supposed to cost. I knew how much things should be. I knew how to do things on the cheap because I could just put it together myself because of my degree. So in retrospect, I believe that my $100,000 fashion degree that I never officially used was actually there to help me do burlesque. So that's that. And also, of course, I had spent a bunch of money in junior college as well, but not nearly as much as you spend at like a fucking private school to do fashion, right? So the woman who had taught us to do flats, okay, so when you design, okay, so you've got your croquis, you've got your like fashion figures, you've got your fabric, your mood board, whatever, but you don't give that to the pattern maker. What you give to the pattern maker is your flats, right? Because they don't give two shits about any of that. They want to know the flats. And also at the same time, you would give them like flats with like all the fabric because they need to be able to feel and know the fabric, right? So you give them flats. And so the woman who taught me how to do flats, and by the way, even at the academy, I always got an A for my flats, was the woman who set up the fashion department at the academy, but I didn't know that at the time. She never talked about it in junior college, but she was responsible for setting up the fashion department at the school at the academy. And I didn't even know that, but I had kept in touch with her because I had let her know where I was going, and I had kept in touch with her. And so that's how I found out, because she later told me, like, oh yeah, I used to live and work in San Francisco, and by the way, I set up that fashion department that you're now going to. The head of the BFA department was this British woman who kind of hated me, and many of the people who actually headed up the fashion department at the academy, God, it's been so many years since I graduated, and this still feels like some kind of like gun to the head confessional. It's so hard to talk about this shit. Even just dumb shit, like what abusive piece of trash school you went to is fucking hard to talk about. So those people were British. So Fiona was the head of the department, of the BFA department, and this guy named Simon was the head of the MFA department, and they were British. Simon had been Alexander McQueen's roommate when they had both gone to St. Martin's, right? And so that's kind of what Simon was known for. Then there was also this other lady who was a little bit older than Simon and Fiona, because they, I think, were like in their 40s at the time that I went there, which would have been right around the beginning of, it would have been right around 2000 and kind of the first few years. And then there was this woman who was older, maybe in her 60s, named Gladys Parent Palmer, and she'd been a very famous fashion illustrator, and I don't know what the fuck she was the head of. Oh, wait, no, I'm sorry, am I stupid? She was the head of literally the entire fucking department. So, I had pissed off Fiona, the head of the BFA department, which was the program that I was in, pretty early on without meaning to. It just happened. I've got a skill for that. And so that just kind of happened. And so I remember at one point, Fiona would do stupid shit, like one time she made me look at all of my illustrations on the floor. She's like, we'll just look at them on the floor without any reason or any explanation. It was just really important to look at them all on the floor. Even though we had a giant table and I could have spread them all out, but she just really wanted to look at them on the floor, and so that's what we did. That only happened once, and I remember having to do like 4 or 5 times the amount of work as the other students just to barely pass, because the people didn't really like me, whereas the other students could show the same illustration week after week after week without making any fucking variation on it, but because they weren't in the shit pile like I was, they could do whatever the fuck they wanted. Maybe see, this is what happens when you talk about this old shit. That's my bitterness coming out from all of that. That's my bitterness. Maybe that's just my perception that they could do whatever the fuck they wanted. Maybe that's my perception. But if my ass wanted to pass, I had to come with 40 fresh sketches every single week. At least that's how I felt. That's how it was made clear to me. So, but that's fine. It's not a problem, right? It just means that I can come up with a lot of ideas and I can get rid of a lot of ideas, because editing was the most important thing that I learned in fashion school. No matter what project I ever turn my attention to, whether it's designing a sticker or whether it's designing a burlesque costume, editing I learned from fashion school, because in order to get an actual collection, if you didn't edit, and if you didn't edit in a merciful way, I'm sorry, I meant merciless. Again, I don't know what the fuck I'm saying. If you didn't edit in a merciless way, you were not going to get the look or the collection that you wanted. And so editing was the process that was the most valuable that I learned by going to art school. I just learned editing. Not in my speaking, obviously, but in other aspects of my life. So this is so hard to talk about because there's like so much there. There was such enormous pressure to go to this school where on top of that, the people didn't even like you. I remember one time Fiona said, I said something to her, I was in like level 1 or 2, because there were like 4 in the BFA program. There were 4 levels of fashion design and pattern making that went along, right? So pattern making, draping, and flat pattern were all one class, and then there were 4 levels of those, and then you had design, and that there were 4 levels of that, and so those always went together. Design and CDFP, all the way until you made it to your senior collection. So I remember one time I was talking to Fiona, and I said something about when I do my graduation show, and without thinking, she said, if you make it that far. I said, when I make it that far, and she said, if you make it that far. And I was like, you are already telling me that I'm not going to make it that far, and I'm only in like level 1 or 2. And I remember telling that to Justine, the woman from the other school, and she's like, well, maybe that woman won't be there anymore by the time that you graduate. But Fiona had been there for like many years. I don't know how many years before I became one of the students there, but she'd been there for many years. The funny thing is that Fiona did quit being the head of the BFA department by the time that I actually was a senior, but oddly enough, it didn't help me with, I never did a graduation fashion show. They never let me do that. So there was this tremendous amount of pressure at this fucking like highfalutin school, and I kind of went crazy my first like year or 2 there. I had like this emotional break with reality that revolved around having like this obsessive crush on a teacher that wasn't even in the fashion department, didn't have anything to do with him, But my mind, I was in so much, I was under so much stress in my mind that I just had this like mental break with reality, and then somehow it sort of like corrected itself, and everything was okay after that. Like this obsessive crush I had, I used as sort of like this weird like balm to kind of like soothe the horrific pressure that I was under, because I had taken out all these loans, and you know, at the beginning of 2000 it was $1,500 a class, and I didn't come from a wealthy family, so that was like a horrific amount to spend on one class. And I remember once or twice I failed a class and had to make it up, and like, you're spending more money to do that. I think that maybe only happened once, but it was just this horrendous and horrific amount of pressure. And by the time that I had graduated, the classes cost more than that, obviously, because it was 4.5 years later, and I didn't even care at that point how much they cost. I was like, get me the fuck out of here, I just want to get the fuck out of here. So because of this like weird attachment thing that I had in my mind around this like obsessive crush around this teacher, I kind of had suffered like this breakdown basically, and I was in summer school. Fiona was teaching it, Fiona, the head of the fashion department, and I just remember sitting there at one point and feeling so burnt out and so exhausted, and I just like, I let the pencil roll out of my hand. I was using some colored pencil, it just rolled out of my hand, and it just rolled right across the desk, and I kind of sat there for a few minutes, and I looked over at her, and I just said, I'm feeling suicidal. And so she took me out of class, she put me in, there were like little administrative offices, and she put me in one of these little offices, and she gave me this like, okay, when you go to a fancy expensive school, they have like a help center for the students. And so she had called up somebody who was kind of like one of these people who had worked at this help center. Her name was Sarah. She had been very kind to me. Her name was Sarah. And she was like talking to me. She was talking to me, and I was just sobbing to this woman. I was sobbing to her. I was like, I'm under so much stress and pressure, and this thing happened with this teacher. And the thing that had happened with the teacher was that I had written him a couple of like inappropriate emails that like, you shouldn't really write your teacher. Nothing like super, like this was like way before, I didn't send him my cunt or anything. They were just not super appropriate emails. It was very sort of like, not necessarily, like, it wasn't like psycho necessarily, but it was but it was definitely inappropriate. So he had complained to somebody like, hey, can you get this crazy ass bitch off my back? And so they're like, somebody had to call me into, I can't remember who it was that I spoke with. I think it was Melissa Marshall. And she was like, this person doesn't want to have a relationship with you. And I was like, oh, I'm so sorry, how humiliating and embarrassing. I think I'll go kill myself now. And so it didn't really happen overnight. Maybe that feeling of like, this weird sort of like feeling of, I don't even know what it was, rejection and whatever all of that was. It was like a mess of like a toilet had exploded inside of my mind. That feeling lasted maybe a month or 2 or 3, I don't know. And then the pressure of it got to be so bad that when I was in that summer school class, in that moment, the pencil rolled out of my hand, and I was like, I literally don't give a fuck about this. I'm feeling suicidal. And so Fiona took me into one of these little side rooms, had me talk to Sarah, this really kind lady from the Student Help Center. I told her all of this stuff, and I could barely talk. I was sobbing. And then she's like, Sarah, she said, I want you to check yourself into the hospital. I want you to go and check yourself into the hospital. I really want you to go and do that. And so she's like, do you have insurance? I did, because I was under my dad's insurance at the time, up until the age of 26 in California, and I was like 24 or 25, I can't quite remember, yeah, I was around 24, and so I promised her that I would do that. I got off the phone, and what I didn't know is that Simon, who had the office next to Fiona's office, that's what it was. We were in Fiona's office talking while Fiona went back to teach the students. Logical. So next door was Simon's office, so BFA, MFA. So Simon happened to be next door in his office at the time, I think, and I think he overheard the conversation. So I think this is what happened. So what I later found out, supposedly, is that one of Simon's students had committed suicide. supposedly some boy had jumped off of a roof. I have no idea if this is true. I never verified it. I honestly don't know. But I heard from other students that Simon had a student, somebody in the MFA program, who had killed themselves while they were in the program, in the MFA program. So, I checked myself into Alta Bates at Berkeley, and the doctor, I just remember this doctor being like, the first thing he said when he saw me was like, I bet you push yourself very hard at school, don't you? That was literally the first thing that he said to me, and I was like, yeah? Like, what? You, like, doesn't everybody? And so the only thing that he really wanted to do for me was to give me a prescription for Xanax, and I was like, okay, I'm not going to take Xanax, I don't want Xanax. He literally gave me 1/4 milligram of Xanax, and it was one prescription, and he's like, just take it, even if you don't use it, even if you don't refill it, even if you, whatever, just take it. So, okay, whatever. So before I left, after the doctor had left, because I was in the emergency room, after the doctor had left, this is Alta Bates in Berkeley, because I was living in Berkeley at the time, because the academy's in San Francisco, so I would commute from Berkeley to SF every day for school. So after the doctor left the room, there was a door open right across the hall, and I heard this guy say, hey, like, hey you, and I'm like, yeah, what? He's like, come in here and talk to me for a moment. And this guy became one of my best friends. This was a man named Thomas. He was quadriplegic, and it turned out that we were both suicidal on the same day, and so we pretty much became best friends for a few years after that. And I have a lot of wonderful stories about Thomas. Thomas and his family were from Fiji, and so he taught me a little bit of Fijian, not very much. I can just say bula and mode. I think those are the only two things I ever really learned. They did give me a cannibal fork, and one of those things that you whack people over the head with. The cannibal fork, I think one of the ends of the fork broke off, the brain fork, so I think it only has three prongs, and then the thing that you hit people on the head with, that broke at some point. I don't know what kind of wood these people are making this out of. Anyway, so Fiji. And so, yeah, so I really loved hanging out with people from Thomas's family, and I felt very adopted by Thomas and his family, just like I had by Elisa and her family. And Elisa and her family, Elisa's dad was Irish, and then her mom was like Native American. And so they were just this like really like amazing, like down to earth, like bunch of people, and Thomas's family was the same way, so I felt very at home and very comfortable. Probably I shouldn't use people's real names, like, I don't know, it's too late at this point, but hopefully it's okay. And oh my god, I don't know, it's like, it's so hard to talk about this because I haven't thought about this in such a long time. It was really hard to go to that school. So the person, Ileana, was a size 14. She's the one who's like, don't let this bitch drag you down. She was a size 14 and she always wore black. And it was a big deal because I wanted to do plus size fashion, and nobody was gonna let me do that. They weren't gonna let me do that in school, right? So they were like, Ileana said to the entire class that I was in that there was no market for plus size fashion, that it wasn't a real thing, and that don't go into something like that, basically, was what she was telling people. And what was hilarious about her saying that is that she would constantly complain about how she never had anything to wear because she was a size 14, and so she always wore hideous, ugly polyester clothes that looked like they came from Walmart, like black garbage every single fucking day, and she constantly complained about how there was never anything to wear because she was a size 14, but then she sat there and told me not to do plus size fashion, and that wasn't a market, and that other people shouldn't do plus size fashion either because what the fuck are all of you stupid bitches thinking of, or something like that, right? So this is the kind of school that I went to. This is the kind of like cognitive dissonance that I was exposed to at that school. So in order to finish up that summer semester that I had been in with Fiona, where the pencil had rolled out of my hand and I told her that I was suicidal, Simon decided to take over. He would coach me in his office one-on-one, just privately. He'd be like, you know what, don't worry about it. Let's just finish this out, and then I'll guide you through the project, and you'll do the project for me, and it's no big deal. So I would do sketches for him, I would do illustrations for him, and I remember at that time, I remember at that time, oh god, this is so hard to talk about. At that time, I had a project that I was working on where the inspiration for the collection was the X-Files. And so I wanted to come up with like all these like crazy sort of like ideas that was inspired by the X-Files, and like every time that I designed something, I always imagined what that would look like when it walked down the runway, when the collection walked down the runway, meaning when it was on a live human being. So that was how I tried to design things. I came up with that collection, whatever it was back then, and I finished out the class. I got my credit for the class, and that was how I met Simon. And Simon had been Alexander McQueen's roommate when they both went to St. Martin's. So Simon sat me down at one point and he was like, do you know who Leigh Bowery is? I'm assuming that you know Alexander McQueen. Do you know who Isabella Blow is? And he like sat down and he put all these people in front of me and he's like, you should know about these people because these people are... I can't quite remember really how he put it, but like, these are the people you ought to know about. Like, let's get you educated on this so that you can, I don't know. He never said anything about having a future. I don't think, even when I was in my 20s, I never really felt like I had a future. It just wasn't something that I felt. I always felt like I'm gonna have a really shitty fucking lifetime, aren't I? I just always had that feeling ever since I was a small kid, ever since I was 4, I just always had that feeling that I was gonna have a shitty lifetime. Which is sad because it would have been nice if I hadn't had that feeling, and that did pretty much turn out to be true. And even now, I'm living with my mom in a 1-bedroom apartment, barely able to earn grocery monies by teaching English on Preply. So my life is fucked unless a miracle happens, right? And you know, people can point to things that they did that fucked up their life, right? I did meth, I became a prostitute, I don't know, fucked the wrong guy and he ruined my life, whatever it is, right? The thing that I did wrong that fucked up my life, other than incarnating on the planet in general, was that I went to fashion school. I had a dream and I wanted to become a couturier and I believed it was possible, and I went to fashion school for 4.5 years where I took out loans for $100,000, and that was the thing that fucked up my life. That was the thing that fucked up my life. So because I made that decision to follow a dream back in 2000, it fucked up my life. I don't think that was the only thing that fucked up my life, but going to fashion school was definitely a pretty enormous mistake. I mean, I don't know that it really necessarily was a mistake because I don't know what other school I was going to go to. I wasn't going to go to nursing school. I wasn't going to go to veterinary school. I wasn't going to go to accounting school. I wasn't going to go get a degree in English literature. I wasn't going to go do those things. So I wanted to have a skill and a craft. I believed at the time that fashion and apparel and clothing were something very practical to go into, and it should have been logical, but somehow it wasn't. So the fact that Simon had taken the time not just to sit there and have me turn in some sketches, you know, which probably were pretty remedial, I would imagine at the time, and to complete a project or something, you know, that was kind of him. He didn't have to do that since he was the instructor, since he was the head of the MFA program at that time. And I really didn't necessarily understand why he was doing that. And then later on, I heard from another student that he had had a student commit suicide who had been like in the program, in the master's degree program. And so maybe that was it. Maybe he just felt like he didn't want someone to take their own life, right? But the fact that he had like sat down with me to talk about these different people, and that he kind of like took the time to sort of get to know me, and he didn't hate me. He didn't hate me automatically the way that some of the other teachers did. And some of the other teachers would hear from like other teachers that I was whatever. And so they would automatically like not like me before they even met me. And it was just this gross little inbred group. And Simon was like the only person at the time who actually treated me like I might actually be a fucking worthwhile human being. And when you're going to these really shitty, really inhumane schools, that's actually like a big deal. So I always felt very grateful to Simon for that. I always felt very I really just always kind of felt very, I kind of loved Simon. I don't know what a better word for it would be. You know, he taught me about Leigh Bowery. He made me go look at Alexander McQueen's stuff, like, in the store. And he's like, go and see how this is constructed. Just go and take a look at it. And so, you know, it would be like a regular thing to go to Neiman Marcus, to have to sketch stuff. You had to sketch stuff. You had to, like, look at stuff, see how it was constructed, and all of that. And so those were the three people that Simon, like, really wanted me to know about. Alexander McQueen, Isabella Blow, and Leigh Bowery. And it kind of saved my life. It saved my life that those people existed. It saved my life that they were fabulous. That they were just these, like, crazy mavericks, and that maybe I wasn't alone, you know? The BFA program, to be perfectly honest, was like this enormous ripoff, because basically they wanted you to make clothes for Target. They wanted you to be, like, just a commercial designer, and they didn't really care about creativity. Nobody gave a fuck about couture. People think that you go to fashion school for that reason, but obviously it's not that, you know? And so it was a big deal that summer that Simon kind of was nice to me, and he was a teacher that everybody was afraid of. Everybody was afraid of Simon. And he was nice. He was nice to people. He was nice to you in the hall. He would joke with you. He would chat with you. He could be very sort of like flirtatious in a very sort of like cute, sort of eye-rolling way, like, oh, Simon. And because the vibe of the whole school was so like malicious and sort of so like vicious and just like vile, and like, I don't even know how I did 4.5 years there. It's like, how did I even do the 4.5 years? I mean, and I definitely had PTSD after I got out of that school. I remember Project Runway came out right after I graduated from the academy, and I'd be watching it, and every episode that I would watch, I would cry. And maybe about 7 episodes in, but the funny thing is I didn't even know that I was crying. I didn't notice that I was crying. Maybe like the 7th episode in, I'd be like, I literally have tears streaming down my face, and I became aware of the fact that I had tears streaming down my face and that I have PTSD from this. And I actually just got to a point where I couldn't really watch Project Runway, and I had to just not watch it. I never did work as a designer after I graduated. San Francisco has a very small design industry, and it's very hard to get hired for your first job because the industry there is so small. I tried to go to LA to get hired, but I didn't have much luck there either. And basically, I just ended up doing customer service jobs and admin jobs most of the time that I lived in San Francisco. And the reality was that most of the people who hired me for customer service and admin were tech companies. I worked mostly for tech companies, doing admin and customer service jobs. And the first 2 years after I graduated from school were really, really hard. They were really, really hard because I was letting go of my dream of becoming a designer. And that was really hard for me because I had really invested everything, not only financially, but emotionally in that dream. So when I came across 2 or 3 days ago, a little trailer about this movie called Leigh about Isabella Blow, it brought up so many emotions, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to talk about it, but it seems appropriate because I don't think I've ever publicly talked about what it felt like to go to fashion school. And there was another pattern making teacher also from London, because a lot of these people were from, they came from London, so there were a lot of British people doing fashion at the academy in those days. I don't know if there still are. And this guy's name was Patrick, and he knew Isabella Blow. They were friends, and they used to hang out. And he used to say all the time, because she was a lady, she was part of the aristocracy, and so he used to say all the time, she's no lady, she's no lady. And I'm like, whatever, we're just here fucking learning how to fucking, do our fucking pattern making. And Patrick didn't like me. I'm sure that I was that student who was I always felt greasy and sweaty, and even though I was thinner then, I always felt fat, I always felt gross, I always felt like like this nasty blob that was just like taking up space there. And to be honest, I kind of feel that way sometimes now about my body too. Not that I'm necessarily sweaty, although with the humidity it's like that, but being in a physical body isn't something that's super comfortable for me. It feels very gross and unnatural, and it feels like I was put into something that I'm not supposed to be in, and they tied off the top, and now I'm stuck in it. And I felt that way pretty much most of my life. Like, it's very uncomfortable to be in a third density physical body. It's not for me, but I feel like I have to keep doing it, you know, just keep waking up every day. So it's kind of, yeah. So there was a lot of trauma that happened for me in those 9 years of studying fashion. Not at the first school. The first school was like kindergarten compared to the second school, but like the sum total of 9 years, right? And then you don't even work in your fucking industry. And also for the second school, I spent $100,000 to go there in like student loans and these crazy loans. And then I was like homeless for how many years and couldn't pay. I've never been able to, I don't know, I deferred them and whatever. My dad paid off some of those loans. He took a loan to pay off some of my loans, and then he died. So my dad did that for me. So he paid off about 40 grand of my student loans. I think I defaulted on the rest a few years ago. I don't know. I don't even know, to be perfectly fucking honest, because they were private loans, and that was during the private loan scam of the early 2000s where colleges like that were doing that. So, okay. So the academy, okay. So I remember being in my early 30s and I was at Barnes & Noble and I bought a book of Alexander McQueen. I hadn't really been able to like think of fashion or look at fashion or deal with fashion for a long time after that, after graduating from the academy, because it was just like a lot, it was just trauma that I wanted to bury. You know, I had a dream, the dream failed. You have to feed yourself, you have to live somewhere, I don't know. So, I don't know. I bought this book at Barnes & Noble and there were all these like crazy reptilian designs and I was like, oh God, David Icke. I mean, like really crazy stuff. And then I remembered something that happened also during fashion school where I had this friend named Alex who was in the MFA program. Oh yeah, and Svetlana was also nice to me. She was also in the MFA program. Those were two people that were nice to me from the MFA program that I had some classes with. Yeah. And so Alex was like, both Alex and Svetlana, but more Alex. Alex came into this one class that we were having one day and she's like, Simon just went off on us. I'm like, what are you talking about? He just went off on you. She's like, he just yelled at all of us. I'm like, what did he yell at you guys about? And she's like, he said that he started saying that the reason that we like what we like is because there's a group of men that tells us what to like. And I was like, what the fuck are you talking about? What group of men is telling you what to like? What are you talking about? And so Alex like went into this explanation about how Simon started to go off and started to tell them that like there's a group of people that control the world and that everything that they do, you're gonna do what they tell you to do because that's what they're gonna tell you to do. And Alex was telling me all of this and I was like, is he maybe under a lot of pressure or something like that? And why would he tell you something like that? And so I'm thinking of this as I'm looking at these very strange, really reptilian designs in Alexander McQueen, the book that I just bought. I'm thinking of Simon and Alex. I'm thinking of David Icke. And then, yeah, and then you can, I don't know. I don't know. You can maybe think the same thing applies. Okay, so Alexander McQueen, from what I know, okay, oh my God. One time I was at the school library, it was on the 6th floor. I used to go there to cry. So my place to go to cry would be the 6th floor, the library, and I would park myself in front of like one of the computers and I would pretend that I was like looking something up, but I would just like sit in front of the computer and cry. So that was my place where I went to cry. And so one time I was like looking up an actual book that I needed. I think it was a book for my actual final graduating project. And I had found this book, I can't remember what it was of, but when you look at the cover, when you open up the cover of this book, I don't even know what that's called in publishing, but when you have like the the part that attaches to the cover, and then the flappy open part, but it's like fancy, so it's not like the printed word part. Now I sound like a moron. So that part, those two, in the front and in the back, there was a picture. Oh, it must have been a book about Leigh Bowery. Maybe it was a book about Leigh Bowery. So so that cover part, like the inside cover part, had a photo of an audience that was staring, like somebody on the stage took a photo of this audience, and right in the middle of this photograph of this audience, Simon and Alexander McQueen are standing next to each other in the crowd. And I just remember like staring at that. So Simon told me during that summer that I was suicidal that he and Alexander McQueen had gone to a bunch of clubs in London, and that they were like, you know, they were like young, they were students, they were young, and they followed this performer named Leigh Bowery, and that they would like go and watch him, and that they would like, you know, they were very like in awe of this performer. Can you imagine these like young, you know, design students? And Simon told me that he would wear all these crazy costumes, and that sometimes he'd wear costumes where like he couldn't go to the bathroom for the whole night or whatever. And Leigh Bowery was the kind of performer where he did a very, I always thought of it as performance art, but he's now sort of categorized as a drag artist or a drag performer. Obviously, if you watch Drag Race, you've heard Leigh Bowery's name a million times, right? So Leigh Bowery would do weird things where he would like take an enema and like shit all over the crowd, and there'd be like photographs of that, of like his shit spraying all over the crowd, and like there were Simon and Alexander McQueen like in the crowd. I don't know. I mean, so Simon would tell me about some of this stuff, right? He told me about like these people or whatever. And then Patrick was always like saying that Isabella Blow wasn't a lady, and I was like, unless you're gonna give us more details, like what the fuck do you mean she's not a lady? Like what does that even mean? I'm not a lady, I'm wearing overalls to class. I don't feel like a lady. What are you talking about? So yeah, so shit kind of got weird. There were other stories that I could tell and other things that I could tell, but basically fashion at these higher levels is very much like the music industry at these higher levels, is like anything at the higher levels, right? So if you don't want to work for Target and you want to work for Alexander McQueen, who's designing stuff that should be in a David Icke book, then I don't know. I was naive and I just thought that you could work hard and be talented. Well, what if I work 70 hours a week? What if this is my whole life? What if I'm talented? What if this? That's not going to make you a designer. None of those things will make you a designer. It's sad, but that's not what it is. And I'm not saying that the people that are at that level aren't talented and don't work hard. I just mean that hard work and talent by themselves are next to worthless because of the way that the world is run. And the fact that Simon had some kind of like, that he exploded all over like Alex's class one day, trying to tell him about that, I've never forgotten that. And this was over 20 years ago. So that was interesting to me. So clearly people knew, and I don't know what's gonna be in this movie. I mean, I didn't even know this person. I didn't know any of these people. I loved Leigh Bowery, and I studied all kinds of books with Leigh Bowery in it. He was dead at the time. He died of something that was AIDS related. I don't remember like what exactly, but it was AIDS related. And at the time that Simon was telling me about Alexander McQueen and Isabella Blow and Leigh Bowery, the only one of them who was dead was Leigh Bowery. Isabella Blow and Alexander McQueen were still alive, and Isabella Blow committed suicide by drinking Drano because she had tried to have a baby and get pregnant, but she wasn't able to. This is what I understand, and she drank Drano and died in the hospital, which must have been a dreadful and painful death. And this happened after I was suicidal and after Simon told me about them. And Alexander McQueen lost his mother. His mother died of like natural causes, and he'd been very close to his mother like his whole life. And Isabella Blow was the person who discovered Alexander McQueen. They were like it was almost like they were married. They were best friends, and after she died, he committed suicide. And so so okay. So that's yeah. Yeah. So that's the industry that I was trying to go into when I was a naive 20 something. And I'll never forget Simon's kindness to me. I could tell so many other stories about that place, but I won't because I feel like it's a bit pointless. I was just trying to get to. I was really triggered by seeing the trailer for the film about Isabella Blow, and so I just wanted to talk about what that person means to me. Philip Tracy was the hat designer, so he made all of her hats that she wore. I loved the one that said Blow in like very beautiful, delicate bird feathers, and I had wanted to be a couturier because I was young and naive, and I believed that that's the kind of planet that I was on, that you could just be hardworking and talented and do things. But this was clearly not a group of people that I probably was ever gonna gain access to or belong to. It's probably a good thing that I didn't. I might not be alive today if I had. Not that I, love being alive or something, but that path wasn't meant for me. And so I had to give all of that up. And the people that loved me and supported me most from the school were my friends who were animation students. I had my best friend was an animation. Actually, I had 3 best friends who came from the animation department, and 2 sort of like more casual friends that came from the animation department. And so the animators always seemed like the stable, normal, nerdy people. Those were always the people that I was friends with. We'd hang out, we'd talk about stuff, we'd watch movies. Animators are usually film nerds, and so I became a little bit of a film nerd. Not like I should be, not like grade A film nerd, but like definitely like B grade film nerd, like more than probably the average person, I would think. But I became a bit of a film nerd at that point. And if you go back and watch the video where we talk about burlesque inspiration, I tell you a little bit about why I became obsessed with Stanley Kubrick, and so that's in there as well. So a lot of things happened in fashion school, and that was trauma that I kind of just wanted to bury. Regarding the academy itself, that school is owned by the Stevens family, which has very close ties to Bohemian Grove. Elisa Stevens' father started the school back in like 1913 or something like that. They're very tied to Bohemian Grove. The school, the academy was said to be, I didn't even know what any of this stuff was at the time. I just wanted to be a designer. The academy was said to have been a real estate scam. However, my friend Doug knew somebody who had been an accountant for the Stevens family, and she said that family was, she's like, I believe her exact words were, "You have no idea how many zeros are at the end of that family name." And so that's really, people who open an art school, even in San Francisco, have no right to be that rich. And they were already rich before they opened the art school. One theory is that because the academy was so wealthy, they were always buying up property, often illegally, in the city of San Francisco, and doing legal battle back and forth with the court over the property. But in the meantime, it was operating as a school. So there was an article that came out a while ago that the academy is basically just a real estate scam. Knowing what I know today, I'm willing to bet that allegedly, it's probably the real estate and the school are probably a front for money laundering, allegedly, is my guess. Yeah. So who is the Stevens family and what's their connection to Bohemian Grove? I don't necessarily know. I don't necessarily know. I remember one time, my best friend and his best friend, were filming something from one of their classes, and they had gone to this alleyway up by Grace Cathedral, and somebody came out of this imposing building and shooed them away. And what they didn't know at the time was that that was the headquarters of Bohemian Grove. And here there are two art students going to this school that were trying to film something for class, some, you know, little project or whatever they were doing for class. And they're like, you can't film around here. And they chased them off, right? They were going to film something in the alley. And so that was Bohemian Grove. And so my best friend likes to tell me the story of how they accidentally blundered in like two puppies. Yeah. So there's a lot going on with that particular school. I never used to think so, but I would say that that school ruined my life in a lot of ways. I always was one of these Ayn Rand sort of bootstrap individual people, but after having been homeless for many, many years, I basically think that the school ruined my life, and it ruined my any hope of a future that I might have had. And not because of the but it might have been ruined before that. I mean, maybe there's just something in my chart where my life is always has to be ruined for some reason, right? Sometimes people come in with these charts where your life is going to be ruined no matter what you do, so don't worry about it. Go ahead, go to fashion school. It'll be ruined anyway. So maybe it would have been ruined anyway, but maybe that school ruined my life a little bit. And I try not to think about that, because whether it did or not doesn't really matter, because the thing that happened, you know, and couldn't have happened any other way. It just was what happened. I'm willing to bet that that school was also highly abusive to many other students, and I witnessed lots of other students getting abused by that school. But the problem is that the way in which the students were abused was within the realms of them pretending to give you a good education. So they were pretending to be hard on you to make you a real designer, but what they were really doing was abusive. The way that they taught the classes, the way that the school was run, I mean, all of it was just fucking abusive, but it was under the guise of training you to be a designer in the real world, and so it was okay. So I was working in 2025 at San Francisco Paratransit, which was a job that I loved and a workplace that I absolutely loved, and I loved so many people that were working in that office at the time. There were a lot of really fucked up people in that office too, and those people can fuck right off, but there were so many wonderful people as well, and I was like so happy to work there because of all the beautiful, wonderful people that were there. And so I was saving up money to move to France because I just wanted to start over. And I remember sometimes I would do different things on my lunch break. I had an hour lunch break. I was in, you know, downtown San Francisco, so sometimes I would take my lunch break and I would like go around, and I'd go to the herb store, or I'd go to the bookstore, or I'd go to the library, or I would do whatever. And, you know, I'd be like doing some shopping. I would take a grocery bag back to my desk with me and all of that. So there was one day where I was on BART, and I was like dressed in a very funky way, because I like to dress like really funky to work. These are just like very frumpy Little House on the Prairie sort of work dresses, but they're comfy and there's no AC, so they're good for like summer, right? So that's why I'm wearing my like little frumpy, like little work dresses. So this one day I had like a very funky outfit on, you know, and I had my little grocery bag. I had a bunch of herbs in it. I had some food in it. I had all this stuff in it, and I was just heading back to work. And I'm on BART, and I turn around. I'm looking to my right, and I'm like, I think that's Simon. I think I saw Simon on the train one time, and I kind of like, I was like, oh shit. I hadn't seen him in such a long time that I didn't know if it was really him or not. And I just kind of kept turning around, and I was like, should I say something? And then I heard this voice say, don't you dare say anything. And I was like, okay, I'm not gonna. I didn't physically hear a voice, but it was more just like, somebody was in my head saying, don't you dare say anything, like that fucking school, you know, like that kind of vibe. So I was like, all right. And in any case, I didn't know what to say. But I just remember kind of like, we were kind of giving each other the side eye, and I was like, holy shit, wow, I think that might be Simon. And yeah, so when I was suicidal, Leigh Bowery, Isabella Blow, and Alexander McQueen saved my life. Just knowing that crazy fashion people like that existed saved my life. And Isabella Blow and Alexander McQueen committed suicide, which is pretty fucking hilariously, darkly ironic. And Leigh Bowery died of AIDS-related issues, health issues. And yeah, that time in my life was very, very crazy. And the Academy is probably a cover for like some sort of trafficking, allegedly. Because it's crazy that they're in like cahoots with Bohemian Grove, which I'm pretty sure that they are. And also, which would make sense, right? I mean, I now know that the world is run in a way that I wouldn't have understood when I was in my 20s when I was going to that school. So yeah, also Elisa Stevens' house was right across the street from Bohemian Grove headquarters. I don't know if it still is. It's probably still owned by her family, I would think. And I had one teacher who would take us there. He would take us up to Grace Cathedral, and he'd let us do the maze in front of Grace Cathedral. And it was always like art history sort of stuff, right? So like it was like our little field trip for art history. And he would always point out Elisa Stevens' house, which was directly across the street from the headquarters of Bohemian Grove, and she owns the school. And, you know, and he'd be like, if you're ever pissed off at somebody and you want to kill somebody, this is the house to go to. He wouldn't say that. But I never really understood, like, why do you keep pointing out this house to us all the time? And, like, I had several field trips where he would do that. He'd be like, and that's Elisa Stevens' house. I'm like, okay, do I need to know that? I'm just trying to be a designer. I don't care where this bitch lives. You know, I was just trying to be a designer. And so I think, looking back on it, I think that was his way of being like, if you ever want to destroy these people because they fucked up your life, go here. Don't take it out on your, like, low-level teachers, right? And over the years, you hear so much controversy about like how the teachers are treated and how the contracts aren't renewed and how they don't make money and they don't pay good wages for like their lab techs and all of that kind of shit. And a lot of people that went to the academy simply ended up working as a lab tech or as a teacher for the academy because they couldn't get work in their field. That was super common, and everybody always like would talk about that. We would always joke about, well, in the worst case, you'll always just work for the academy. So it was very much sort of like the company town of art in San Francisco. And even though I applied to the academy a million times, they would never ever hire me for anything, no matter how low paid the position was. And sometimes I would apply just to fuck with them. Not that anybody cared, I'm sure they just threw it right out. But that's a very fucked up, that was my first experience, not that I knew what it was at the time, of learning how the world works and what kind of people are behind everything and how it runs and what it does. So I'm very curious to see what this Isabella Blow movie is going to be about, how they're going to treat the subject of her death, how they're going to treat her relationship with Alexander McQueen. And if I do see this, which I probably will, there's no way that I'll be able to not cry through it. I will probably absolutely cry through it. And even though these people might have been the most horrific human beings on the planet, and I'm not saying that they are or that they were, I'm not saying that, but I'll never forget Patrick, the pattern making teacher who knew Isabella Blow and would like hang out with her. He was always saying, she's no lady. I'm like, bro, cough up the goods or shut the fuck up, you know? Like, don't just say that, because the students are like, whatever, I've got a project due tomorrow, who cares? So it was stuff like that, right? So these might have been horrific people. I honestly don't know, but to me, from where I sat in that moment during that summer school, when Simon was generous enough and kind enough, because he didn't want me to kill myself, to help me with my fucking project, when that was happening at that time, those people saved my life, and they were like the world to me. Just the fact that a woman existed who wore a hat made out of bird feathers that said blow on it, like saved my life. Just the fact that Leigh Bowery existed, and that he shat on people on a stage, and he did that, and people lined up for that, and they paid for it. It like blew my mind. The fact that Alexander McQueen, I could go to Neiman Marcus and I could see a bunch of crazy braided shit and go back to Simon and be like, how do you make the pattern for this? Like, just the fact that all of that existed fired me up around my desire to become a designer, and it helped me to complete my degree. It helped me to get through the school. So at least I had a degree, so that when I graduated and I was working at 5,000 million tech companies for doing customer service and admin, at least I knew that I could be a designer if the opportunity ever arose. And it's interesting that the opportunity did arise when I started doing burlesque. I was able to do my own costumes, and that's how I felt my degree was useful to me. And also designing my little stickers, which I sell on Etsy. I design them, and then my best friend, whom I met at the academy, he does all the Illustrator and Photoshop work because I can't stand that shit, never could, never will. And so he does that part of it for me. And so, yeah, so it has helped me. I have used design skills in my life, but not necessarily in a terribly formal way, which is fine. I mean, just the fact that I have a little Etsy, or the fact that I can do stuff for burlesque is fine. So there are definitely other stories that I could tell, but I feel like the most sort of pertinent or important ones are those, and I'm very curious to see how this movie is going to treat her and Alexander McQueen, and I'm sure there's a lot that I don't know. Maybe they really were awful people, I don't know. But in that moment, for the person that I was, those 3 people and Simon, so four people, and Sarah, so 5 people, because she made me go to the hospital. And if I hadn't gone, I wouldn't have met Thomas that day, because Thomas and I were both suicidal on the same day, and then we became best friends. And so, yeah, so that's, okay, so that's Sarah, Simon, Thomas, Leigh Bowery, Isabella Blow, and Alexander McQueen. That's 6 people that saved my life on that day. On that day, and in that summer, in that general time period. And I never did do my graduation show. I graduated from the school with a degree in fashion rather than fashion design, because Fiona was right. They never let me do my graduation school because I never made it that far. I never made it past, you were supposed to get to level 6, I think, of design and CDFP in order to do the graduation school, but I was only able to make it to level 4 of CDFP and design, and I think it was more because of the sewing and pattern making side of it. So it wasn't the design part of it that I couldn't pass, it was the construction, sewing, and pattern making part of it that I couldn't pass. Not that I couldn't pass it, I just think that they weren't going to let me. They weren't going to let me go into the 2 higher classes, which would have been 5 and 6. They weren't going to let me do that. So, and Fiona told me, she said it, she's like, if you make it that far, and that was like my first or second semester when she said that. So even though she wasn't the head of BFA at that time, it didn't matter because they weren't going to let me get that far. And so that school really did ruin my life. In a way, because perhaps if they had just let me make it that far, maybe I could have done my collection, and maybe I could have had a future, and maybe I could have gotten somewhere with it. Maybe, I don't know. And if not, then not. But it's stuff that's really hard for me to talk about. It's stuff that I don't normally talk about, and I haven't thought about it in a really long time. I try not to think about it. It's like trauma that I just want to not think about. And, I'm definitely very, very curious about what they're going to do with the movie. And I don't know what kind of people they were. I have no idea what kind of people they were. But in that period of my life, those people were like heroes. They were like everything to me. And just the fact that they existed saved my life. So, yeah. Oh, yes, and I forgot to mention. Okay, so my very last project that I did, it was for CDFP 4 and Design 4, since they never let me move on to 5 and 6. And I had a project where, oh God, they tried so hard to stamp the creativity out of me, and they just weren't able to do it. And I still have my portfolio, I just don't have it here in the country with me. But my very last design project was like this crazy project. And I remember showing it to Simon, and he sort of looked at it and didn't say anything. But in that moment, I had this feeling like these people didn't break my spirit. They didn't break my creativity. They didn't steal my creativity, even though they tried. They tried really hard to make me be somebody who would design something like this. And I'm not knocking anybody who does design that. I'm literally wearing this because it's comfortable, so I'm not knocking the people that design it. This is not what I wanted to go to school to design. So they tried to do that and they didn't, because at the end of the day, my crazy Robert Blackman stuff that I was inspired to do and my crazy stuff that I wanted to do for plus sizes, it was probably more like rave wear, right? It probably was like that. And so they didn't want me to do something niche, whatever. That crazy stuff survived, and my crazy sense of who I was as a designer and as a creative survived. They didn't knock that out of me. They didn't kill that in me. And I think my burlesque is proof of that they didn't kill that had survived even such a miserable, horrible place as their school that you had to pay a lot of money to go to. And then I remember seeing a documentary about this guy, this designer in LA, who designed all this crazy stuff, and I was like, that person literally became the designer that I couldn't be, that the Academy would never let me be. I forget his name, maybe I'm just blocking it out because I don't want to remember, but that person who designed all that crazy stuff, like, I remember watching this documentary going, you literally, that's the stuff I wanted to do, and you're doing it. And again, that was still at the point where I didn't really know what kind of groups run the world. I didn't know anything about Bohemian Grove. I still don't know a ton about them. I didn't know that the school was likely, allegedly, a trafficking operation. I didn't know that they were closely associated with Bohemian Grove, or maybe I did know that but didn't even know what that meant. It wasn't a thing that like you think about when you're a student. You're just thinking about other things. And yeah, like I didn't really know what you have to do to succeed in that world. And I'm sure that if I thought that it was pressure just to go to school, like what would I have done if I had worked for Alexander McQueen? Would I have handled it? I don't know. So probably I dodged a bullet in a way that I wasn't able to go into that world. But it's definitely something that's very, very painful for me, since fashion was my first love. And the thing that I wanted to do most with my life in the world. And so until I like redirected and just did my own art, or just became a performer, which, yeah, I'm grateful that I found something else that I could do instead, right? Like at least I can make my own costumes as a burlesque performer. At least I can perform and express all these emotions. At least I can tell different crazy stories. At least I can make art and sell stickers, to another person that feels the way that I feel, or that understands something about like what I understand of the world. Then yeah, I didn't really have a way to use my degree or to channel any of that creativity. But I think it's significant that the Academy never really managed to destroy the creativity. Like, I'm sure for a lot of other students they did, and I'm sure for a lot of other students, it did destroy their creativity. I might have been homeless, but at least I had my creativity, which doesn't pay, but that's okay. I guess that's okay. I can always try to teach English for groceries. I don't know. It's just very, yeah. So it's hard even just to end this video, because now it's brought up all of the stuff that I'm thinking about. I think there's going to be a lot of really bad karma to a lot of the teachers that treated the students the way that they did. So if those people And that's something that I've actually thought about a lot over the years. If those people go on to have, looping reincarnation, loosh lives, then a lot of those teachers, I think, are going to have really bad karma because of what they did to the students and how they treated the students there. I never found out about the student who was said to have committed suicide. I don't know. And places like that definitely destroy people's lives. I'm sure that the industry as a whole destroys people's lives. I'm sure it's the same as the music industry or entertainment or anything. I'm sure it does destroy people's lives. So that's my little take on that. And if you drive through San Francisco, you'll see how many buildings are owned by the Academy, how many buildings have that Academy logo. I mean, they really do own a lot of that city. Who knows what's going on behind the scenes in terms of like the money? Who knows where they really get their money from? It could potentially just be real estate, but according to what Doug's friend said, I don't know if it's just real estate. Even the real estate could just be a cover for something else. I don't know. So, yeah. That's what it was like to go to the Academy and to try to become a couturier. That's what it was like. All right. I don't know when I'm gonna, oh God, I look so like, I don't know when I'm gonna film anything else, but that's that.